cool. Being recorded. I invited anybody from our team that wanted to join. Joey, who joined, is on, works with me. I don't know who else is able to, the usual conflicts and things, but figured the more perspectives, the better. So,
okay. So for those
what's
of
a good
us,
place to start? Is there like a summary you'd like, or how do you usually do these?
so first, I guess people who aren't aware of you and your company should know who you are, and
Okay.
then you could tell us what your experience as a user was with Istio.
Sure. Okay. So I'm Casey Robertson. I work on the platform engineering team. We have several, but on one of them at Mindbody. So we're a SaaS provider of software to run fitness businesses, CRM, billing, payments, etc. We've used Istio for approximately 2 to 3 years now. We were and still are primarily an on-premises data center company, running in our own colo. About 2 years ago, we embarked on a project to start building our cloud footprint. So we started on GCP. We had an architect at the time that had come from Google and had a lot of experience and recommendations surrounding Kubernetes, and so that kind of brought us into down the Istio path. And so we've been on Istio or using it. I honestly can't remember the first version. We started using maybe 0.8 or 0.9 in GCP. Used to deploy it using the old chart methodology. And then earlier this year, in January, we completed a migration kind of due to some macro level company and direction changes from moving what we had on GCP GKE into AWS and EKS. And later on, once we performed that migration, I believe it was on whatever the first version that supported or released the Istio CTL for the install and upgrade. We moved to that. So it was like 1.3 or 1.4. And then we've been upgrading that ever since. We have a pipeline or a container-based pipeline, Azure DevOps, that does builds a container and then runs the upgrade or runs the Istio CTL commands, whether we're applying manifests or running an upgrade. So that's kind of our deployment process. Then we have a separate chart or Istio chart, policy chart for applying policy. So that's kind of our deployment style. So we're currently on 1.6.9 in all of our environments. Currently running EKS 1.16. We're in the process of upgrading to 1.17. So that's our Kubernetes environment. Let's see, pretty modest clusters, like right now, anywhere from 2 to 12 nodes, depending on environment, kind of like a test alpha environment, and then dev stage prod. And then each of us engineers on the team have our own AWS accounts. We'll have similar infrastructure in our own accounts for blowing things up and testing. We do use the Istio ingress. So we have one ingress defined that creates the load balancer in AWS for us. And then as far as the developers are concerned with their touch point, each of their application repos has a virtual service Helm template defined, and that's where they put in routes and anything particular to their virtual service, and that gets deployed with their application. And it ties into a common HTTPS gateway, so we have a single gateway that all the virtual services bind to.
Do you install Istio for them on their clusters, or do they manage that themselves?
We do that. They don't have their own. There's a monolithic dev cluster, but none of the developers use Istio directly that way. At least in our experience, they've gotten pretty used to the process of using the virtual services and understand that they're routes to their Kubernetes services and how that works. A lot of the rest of it is pretty opaque to them. And I think just based on time and what they're focused on, everything are kind of taken the role of not abstracting it per se, but trying to make that process as easy for them as possible. Some teams do a few more experiments on their own. There are a couple teams that are applying their own, messing around with their own policies and doing things like fault injection and whatnot on their namespaces to try that out. But for the most part, they just define the virtual services, and they've never run Istio CTL or understand what it's doing or what gets built, et cetera. Yeah, like the whole mesh and even Kubernetes, even after this time, is still pretty. Again, depending on the fluency of the team, is still kind of a black box to them.
Okay.
And then one more thing. I mean, it's not. I guess it's not particularly ready to upgrade, but partially one of the ideas, or I saw somebody mention, I think it was actually in the Flagger repo, which is a tool by Weave that does canaries, AB, blue green, etc. We have experimented with that. We're not using it anywhere currently. We like the idea a lot, and somebody had mentioned the possibility of something like a Flagger, either integrating with the upgrade process or something to help handle, because the docs mentioned the idea of doing a canary of the control plane when you do an upgrade. And somebody talked about maybe a product like Flagger doing some integration to help handle that kind of thing a little bit more transparently for the user. So essentially canarying the mesh itself. Yeah, so that's kind of all of our background of what we're running. And then as far as any, like, I kind of came up with just off the top of my head things about the upgrade. So I think I mentioned one thing about going to 1.6 was, and some of this was on us, is the idea is that I think we didn't realize or got lazy or didn't notice when we upgraded that some of the things get deprecated or we move on from. I think mentally you think like, oh, the old things are going to go away or get cleaned up, and they're still hanging around. It's like when I was doing the upgrade to 1.6, I think I realized, or it dawned on us, that the MTLS experience had been simplified a lot since 1.4, where it's on by default, and you don't have to do these, explicitly define it in a mesh policy or anything. And I think somehow that had escaped us, or we missed it. So I was going through the upgrade, and then we had these mesh policies and destination rules and things, and I was thinking, like, do we need these anymore? Do these still have to be here? So I had a little confusion around that. That was just my own issues interpreting the documents. We also ended up having a couple old gateway objects sitting around from previous upgrades, and I think that's more to speak to maybe something around checklists or a way to figure out, for lack of a better term, which objects are still quote unquote being used or referred to somehow. Like if there's some way to reconcile, there's nothing referring to object X, or like, hey, you defined a gateway, but there's nothing, nothing is referencing it in your entire mesh or cluster. Like maybe this is an object for deletion. That would be nice.
Casey,
and then as far,
about your
yeah.
You mentioned that you've got it sounds like several clusters: test, alpha, dev, staging, and prod.
Yeah.
Are those running? They each have their own control plane running in.
Yes. Cluster? Yeah, they're all separate AWS accounts, separate VPCs. Yeah.
And then they'd be running separate meshes as well.
Yep.
There's no like shared root of trust or anything like that.
Nope. Mm-mm.
So then,
yeah,
with upgrades on Istio, do you progress like through test, alpha, dev, stage, prod on an upgrade?
Yeah, we usually do one at a time. The way, like the actual pipeline or the logic in the container, just ends up just being a bunch of bash scripts. Honestly, it's kind of monolithic in the sense that it's just going to march through the environment. So we put some gates. If we know for day-to-day operations, we'll test it locally and then have it run, and it progresses out through the environment. For something like the version upgrade where we want to vet some things first, we just put some gates between those steps. Honestly, some manual gates at this point, because and one of the things I'll come to is like our testing story is slim to none on any of this. It's a lot of, hey, what works? And I guess that's something we could look for, advice or guidance on, is like what's and that we need to look into as well, is what are some of the things people are doing to decide, hey, this upgrade went okay, rather than just, the new relic monitoring isn't dead, or nobody's screaming, or, whatever. Like, hey, your upgrade's good, you're good to go, nothing's non-functional. But yeah, so just manual gates at this point, and then it's up to like the engineers to vet the upgrade. But we don't have much if anything automated at this point for testing.
Okay, and then how often do you upgrade Istio in those environments? Are you looking like every patch release, or?
We've tended, just because of being kind of spread thin, we've generally waited till the next version has had a few releases, and even then it's just an as we can kind of basis. So I know when 1.6 came out, we usually wait for a couple releases and then do it. This time we just happened to be on 1.6.9 by the time we got around to upgrading. So it does take a little time for us, but that's more just due to backlog. I think we normally just like to wait a couple versions. Generally, I think I'd have to look at the releases. I think we probably do same version upgrades, like let's say 1.5.4 to something else, or 1.5.2 to something else. Maybe a couple times in the release cycle, unless somebody happens to see there's something's impacting, or a bug fix or something like that we really need. But I'd say at most we upgrade once, maybe twice within a version, and then just wait for the next minor version release.
I was intrigued that you said you were looking for a checklist about upgrading. As I've wondered the same thing, if we should provide one. Did you end up making your own checklist of things that you do before upgrading?
Yeah, I did. After the call, I can share that with, I can send out a Google Doc link or something.
I would be curious to see what a user's installer's checklist looks like.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. We can share that for sure. We write some wiki doc as we go through these. We try to write some documents down to, help each other out, obviously, give ourselves reminders, and not get siloed off on, I don't want to just become Istio upgrade guy, and Joey doesn't want to be Kubernetes upgrade guy, and, things like that. So we try to round robin these to have each person give it a go, and then we'll pair on it if somebody's unsure. But yeah, we'll definitely share that. One thing I do like, so, and again, this could be just not looking into it deeply enough. I know when you run the apply, the Istio apply, and it executes an upgrade, if you're using a new version of the CLI, it does have some nice output at the beginning about objects that are deprecated or going to get upgraded. Like there's some warnings and things. And one thing I wasn't sure about or couldn't remember is is there a way to dry run those, or is it only going to vet it at run? Okay, there is.
Yeah. Do you remember the flag? I don't know if it's a dry run flag. The install command.
Yes, the install has some. I think it's dry run, and of course, and there's also Istio Analyze, which should give you deprecation warnings, among other things that it warns about. Do you use the Istio Analyze?
I've used it, but I'm thinking now, taking notes, that it's probably something we should just build into our process.
Yeah.
It wouldn't hurt to just have that run anytime an upgrade, or frankly, almost any operation, depending. At least we could run a test against it, or at least have somebody check it before an operation runs.
If we did have that a checklist, I would want to put it there because it warns about deprecate.
Right.
It may warn about some of the orphaned resources you were talking about.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, imagine that's difficult. Like so for example, one of the things that changed is I think off the top of my head was the way the pure authentication worked, like the structure of that YAML file and the API changed. So we had to change a couple of those during the upgrade to 1.6. And this is probably just ignorance on my part on the inner workings of Kubernetes, but is that, are things like auto upgrading those types of objects just too fraught with issues? And the fact that we apply them from a separate source just is never going to make that feasible, because we have YAMLs in a repo, and then like Istio knows this object is changing, or the spec. I mean, I guess there's no way to backport it, obviously. Like even if Istio translated it to like the new format, you're still going to have this deprecated object in your repo that you need to update.
So Kubernetes does give us some handles for that, where we're doing things where you can translate an old object to a new object. We use that on a handful of occasions, but it should be completely transparent to you. You shouldn't see it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, by the way, this is also why we ask you to run the analyzer command. I believe I actually provided this feedback when we changed from the old authentication API to the new peer authentication API. And when we promoted to beta, right? So the security workgroup purposefully add tooling in place in the analyzer command to help user to detect this customer resource you're using is going to be deprecated. And the way it still works is we always deprecate when we first introduce the new thing. We're going to deprecate the old thing. So you're going to have both of them working for one release. And then the next release, we would expect you throughout the release window to be able to, with the warning, be able to upgrade to the new API.
Okay, awesome. That's good to know.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right, because when I look at our upgrade notice or upgrade documentation today, we don't really tell you need to run the analyzer command. It's more like, okay, people working on the project already know, but we didn't make it well known to our users.
Okay.
Well, and the
that's good to know.
It's designed to be good for a lot more than just upgrades. So if you have CICD around the application virtual services, for instance, and Istio config rather than the control plane, you can capitalize on those changes as well and get feedback. For instance, if you've created overlapping host names using wildcard patches, there's an analyzer that should warn you about that.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you would apply the thing and then run analyze, and then, or what's the order of operations there?
You can apply or run analyze against a live cluster with a proposed change. So let's say you're running a virtual service, you would point it at your cluster and at the virtual service as a file. So I guess someone's saying it's hard to hear me. I bet I'm on the wrong microphone.
Oh,
is that better, Lynn?
Oh man, yeah, way better.
Sorry about that. So yeah, if you run it against your cluster and the file, it will take the file as a patch over the config that's in your cluster and produce what-if results. If I applied this, these would be the warnings inside your cluster.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to take that as a note. That would be great.
As we talk about these things, I encourage you not to think of them as things you should have known. And we're it's on us to make sure that our users get this information and that we put it in a way that's obvious. And some signal that we're getting about upgrades in general and analyzers in particular is that we haven't done that yet.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, the documentation is true. Okay, so that's a good segue into one other one was, so on the documentation site, or the documentation for Istio, one thing we struggled finding was, I think with coming from using Helm charts a lot. So for applying things into our clusters, most of those projects will have like a huge default, list of the YAML values for everything, all the knobs essentially for that object. And the Istio documentation was pretty good in that regard. But then when you would drill into certain things, like let's say one of the add-ons is Prometheus or Kiali or something, and you want to know all the options under there. It was not easy to figure that out because the way the docs appear to be generated, it just takes, there's like this add-on resource spec or something. You click into that and then it just says, oh, well, it's just going to inherit whatever this add-on supports. Like it doesn't, you can't keep drilling into everything you can apply there. And depending on what the object was, it became difficult to know all the options without maybe going into GitHub and then trying to figure out this, all the spec you could put in there. And so maybe something on the, so I guess in terms of discoverability, I liked the experience better with the Helm part because the way the values by their nature, you could see everything more easily. It was a little more difficult for some of the add-ons for Istio. But I know, again, after reading after the fact, it looks like probably due to some of this or it looks like things like Kiali and whatnot are going to, that the way we installed it this time around doesn't appear to be the preferred way anymore anyway. So looks like you should install it as its own operator or as its own standalone.
Is Kiali the add-on that you're particularly interested in, or were there other, were you using it to install Prometheus or Grafana?
We're both. So we have, we do separately install Prometheus and Grafana in the cluster. We're kind of in a weird state organizationally where we realize that Prometheus is like the native, the cloud native solution. And it's been nice to leverage things like the Kubernetes mix-in that kind of gives you some either community vetted or best practice type alerts and things for Kubernetes. But at the same time, our entire dev org and a bunch of the rest of the company is heavily in New Relic. And so we're kind of in this state where, again, being pretty spread thin on a lot of stuff, we're having the debate right now between Prometheus and New Relic. I mean, we have New Relic agents on the nodes and things already shipping, shipping a lot of the similar information from Kubernetes. So we're kind of debating on that. So yes, we do plan to keep it probably for Istio for no other reason. This past upgrade, we kind of rediscovered Kiali. I don't know if we broke it before or just hadn't gone in there or something, but it's super cool and useful to see. Sometimes making the mental map of all the objects in the cluster and then being able to see it visually, like the flow is tremendously helpful for troubleshooting. Because by the time all your traffic comes in, you've got, DNS, then Cloudflare, then an ELB, then an ingress, then a service, then, it's like, where's my stuff going wrong? So that's been helpful. And we'll probably keep Prometheus in there too, at least for the time being, because if we plan to leverage Flagger, which we'd still like to, I know Flagger can look at an external Prometheus, but especially if we plan to drop it, I think it looks at the one in Istio. Maybe it installs its own. I can't remember. Just to scrape stuff up from the mesh.
Have you looked into New Relic's support for Istio?
No, not really. No. Do they have a specific plugin or?
Yeah, they have an adapter for our telemetry system. Now, some of these get very old, like people will have merged them 2 years ago and then never updated them. Others are kept up to date with every release. So your results may vary, but I'll drop a link in the chat to their adapter.
Sure. Okay.
And yeah, we have it on. This adapter, you have to watch out because they had integration with the old mixer, which is being deprecated now. So you have to kind of manually enable it because it's not mixer not enabled by default.
Gotcha. Okay, I'll check into that.
I think you are right. Yeah, but I think you are right on our support for add-on. You're absolutely right. The add-on configurations are very hard to discover, and I think the Istio community has been felt pretty hard to maintain the add-on with automation, documentation, and testing, which is why you are probably seeing 1.7 release. The add-ons are moved to samples now. We provided documentation to teach our user how do you integrate add-ons through their own operators, and we kind of getting out of the business of running and operating the add-ons for you.
Sure. Yeah, it's probably a good idea long term. I mean, it's not core to the project. I mean, they're an ecosystem around it, but they're not. Yeah, let those kind of grow on their own. That makes sense.
Yeah, right on.
Okay. One thing, I guess this may be more feedback. We noticed this, or one of the motivations for upgrading, other than keeping up with versions, was we did have a weird issue on the 1.5 release where it seemed like the Prometheus, and we could never figure it out. Fortunately, it seems to have gone away with the 1.6, but the built-in Prometheus was just crashing constantly. Like the pod was just crash looping. I don't know what happened with that. It's kind of not super useful feedback because I don't have a ton of details. We tried bumping versions, giving more resources, different things. Some reason it got into a weird state. I don't know. We kind of chose to blame EKS because we don't love EKS that much, but we were kind of all in engineering wise, as we really liked, as platform people, we liked GCP and GKE a lot, and weren't very happy about going to AWS and EKS, but kind of is what it is. So I don't know if anyone else has seen or had issues with the built-in Prometheus having problems, but it seems happy now, knock on wood. So
yeah, we've seen numerous problems with the built-in Prometheus at a lot of different updates, and that was one of the key motivations behind no longer providing Prometheus install as part of the Istio install. Is we learned that we are actually not Prometheus experts by a country mile, and so we figured it was better, especially for production, to encourage people to have a Prometheus expert in-house who can craft an installation that'll look perfect for them, and we can get hands off.
You just consume it at that point. Okay.
Yeah.
Or Prometheus consumes your stuff. Okay, that makes sense. Let me see if there's anything else I had written down in notes. No, I think that was mainly it. Oh, one thing, if it helps, or just to add more color to our install. So we use for all the rest of our infrastructure, we're a Pulumi shop. I don't know if you've heard of them. We started out as Terraform when we were on GCP. Terraform's a great tool. We started running into issues, just flexibility of Terraform. So we've been on Pulumi for about 2 years now, which essentially consumes Terraform providers, but lets you define all your infra code using TypeScript. So it's been a huge boost for our team's productivity, get all the power of a general programming language and everything to define your infrastructure, which has been great. And one of the things related to Istio is that we generate or we apply create the secrets for the certificates that the gateway or the ingress uses there. So just a point of how we use it, and then we just point to ingress at the secret for that. So.
So I have a question. You mentioned the CICD system for maintaining your kind of pipeline for promoting a new Istio version. Is that CICD system using control plane canaries, or are you doing an in-place update?
Yeah, right now it's in place. I don't know if anyone when did that release, the canary part of the control plane? Version that one? 1.6? Okay.
Okay, I think it started in 1.6, but in 1.7, it's been the recommended way to do upgrades. Okay. So I would say 1.7 probably more formally.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably when we're going to look into it. I think I noticed it when I was doing the reading and documenting for the 1.6 upgrade. I noticed that reference for the first time about that you could do that. And so, yeah, I'd like to explore that more in 1.7. And see what that process, like if that's something, how well we could automate that in terms of, deploying. Now is that just deploying another set of Istio D pods, or is that like duplicating everything? Like how is that working?
It'll duplicate just your control plane, so you'll run a second Istio D, and then you cut over your data planes to the new Istio D as you see fit on whatever schedule you like.
Okay.
The one caveat that I'll give that is that it's still in 1.7. If you're using the Istio ingress gateway in Istio system, it is not canaried. So that does get a hard cutover during a canary update. That's something that I think we're targeting a fix for in 1.8.
Okay, good to know.
So if it's all right, I do have one last question for you, and that is
absolutely.
Like, what is the worst thing that has happened as the result of an upgrade, and kind of what was the fallout there?
Oh man, wasn't there one outage, Joey? I don't know if it was self-inflicted. I can't remember now. I thought we had one. What did we do? Honestly, I think it's generally gone pretty well. Man, I wish I could remember. I have some vague memory of an issue we had. I mean, one thing that has bitten us before, which isn't necessarily Istio related. I mean, it's like a joke amongst all engineers is like who didn't renew the certificate or something, on something somewhere had expired. So I guess any discoverability around that would be cool, like either by Kiali or some other method, like whether those are, we use the self-sign stuff internally for the MTLS, but at the edge, for the, inbound traffic from the internet, those certs live on the ingress, and even just something minor to help, like alert or check for that. I suppose there's something in Prometheus or some other way, but yeah, certificates expiring always scare me because this happened. We've got billions of certificates all over the place, Cloudflare, Akamai, internally, load balancers, etc. So I guess just anything there. But yeah, as far as any upgrades, I don't think we've caused a hard down. I think the only time I recall it did go down is when and this is just process on our side, is I think somebody thought they were in their cube context or something, and they were screwing around with Istio, and they just deleted everything or something, but they were in staging or prod or something. I can't remember which it was, but yeah, it was like all of a sudden it all just was gone but that's on us. It's making guardrails on, hack and your, and everything. So, I think otherwise it's gone fine. It's just kind of like the plotting through the, what each upgrade brings, what we need to check, that kind of thing. But I can't recall a time where, the actual process itself broke down or crashed or anything like that.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great. For your upgrade problem, the secrets for the ingress gateway, that's the secrets managed by yourself, right? Because that's not, I assume it's the outer secrets. The inner secrets are managed by Istio.
Correct.
And the outer one, I assume you set the expiration yourself? Is that accurate?
Yeah, when the certificates are issued by the CA, we get for our public domain names or for our APIs and things. Yeah, we get those. We just forget. I don't know. It's like human nature. They just, I don't know if Istio or anything, sometimes it's useful if things can parse that, or if there's a metric and it's probably something we could surface if we dug into Prometheus or New Relic a little more. We could probably either directly query the cert and check for the expiry or something. I just wasn't sure if there was something built in. Or maybe if Istio control ran, every time it ran, if it just threw a warning that said, hey, like, just a reminder there's a cert here and it looks like it's going to expire or something. Like that would be useful in the CICD.
That makes sense.
Do you want to chime in? Because it sounds like there is something to search for.
No, I'm pretty sure there's a metric. I don't know what it's called. I'm sure we know in a minute. But I think it goes down very natively, so it must be there. I don't know what it's called, or it would probably be good for us to have that in the doc.
Okay, I'll do a little checking. Yeah, I mean, ours is in the whole scheme of things, ours is a pretty simple setup. I mean, I think it's only a couple certificates, but I imagine as folks go, multi-cluster, multi-region, meshes on top of multiple clusters and things that maybe that'd be more useful for them at that point, which I'm excited to do. Hope we get there. We want to try to do, this is kind of a little bit of a greenfield environment for Mindbody, in the sense of this is where we're trying to build our quote unquote modern services, like not as many migrations at this point. It's net new, which is lucky for us. But yeah, like things like multi-clusters on our radar for 2021, because we don't really have a good story at the Kubernetes level right now for, each of our environments is a single cluster right now. We have a few node groups, but one cluster, and we'd like to look at things to make our upgrade processes and then just the clusters in general more resilient. So we're going to have to look at, things like the multi-cluster mesh and things of that nature.
Well, thank you for your report, Casey.
Sure. I hope it helped at all. It was just kind of a brain dump, unfortunately, but.
Oh, no problem. It's good to get real feedback from users who are struggling, because it not only motivates us, but gives us ideas for how to improve our process.
Cool.
So we have another 20 minutes. Casey, if you send your checklist, I will link to it so people who come back and look at our internal document will see that.
Sure.
And I also took notes that I'm going to add the way Lynn is adding right now.
All right.
So other things that the group must discuss today. We have a request to have an alternate meeting time for next week or next month. Maybe noon or 2 hours earlier than it currently is. This is a request from a user in India. Does anyone have any objections if I make this meeting 2 hours earlier than it is? Is that going to conflict with anyone? That would put it right before the workgroup leads meeting.
Real quick, Ed. Casey, you're welcome to stick around for this part, but it's likely to be pretty boring.
Okay. Is this the inside baseball? The inside baseball part of the meeting?
Okay. It's an open meeting, so anybody can attend. But if I didn't have, no, I would still. I'm kidding.
All right. Okay. Well, I probably will drop off soon, but I really appreciate it. It's really nice to. I've worked in enterprise like IT type stuff for 20 plus years, but only very recently in, web open source type stuff. And I really like this aspect of it. Like you would never get this dealing with, closed source vendors and things. So this is really cool to be able to give direct feedback on the product like this. So appreciate it a lot.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
So, Ed, what is the new time being proposed? 2 hours early for the whole hour?
Yeah, I was confused, but it would be, for you and Island, that would be noon Eastern.
Okay, got it.
So that is in direct conflict with the test and release working group, unfortunately, unless we move to a half-hour meeting.
Right, and I'm not sure if I can host this myself next week because I might have jury duty. So I will tell Shamsur that next week is not going to happen. But do you think we could later on in the month have at least one meeting a month to try to bring people in from other parts of the world?
Well, what about the counter proposal? Yeah, if 9 a.m. Pacific is a useful time for people from other parts of the world, it looks like on the Istio calendar, Wednesdays at 9 a.m. is open. That might be valuable.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I would like to do it maybe not every meeting because it's our lunchtime. We already have like steering at our lunchtime. We have networking work group at our lunchtime. This would be another meeting added to our lunchtime. So maybe we can do it, start with the frequency of once a month first. And if we got a lot of people, we can increase the frequencies. I just didn't want to, we change it to lunchtime with inconvenience of some of us who join regularly and then nobody show up. And we had that with the networking work group meeting. for longest time, and then we changed back to I think we changed back to like 2 p.m. Eastern, and then one of the lead was elected from India, so we moved back to lunchtime for us, which is good for that purpose because that lead does join every single time. But I think he's like the one person from Asian join, so if we have constant people show up, I don't mind, but I just didn't want to, move it for nothing.
I agree. Because I've never met Shamsar, I was hoping to get him at least one meeting. Yeah, I wouldn't want to give up my lunches either. Okay. I will figure out what Wednesday that's going to be. So the next item I wanted to mention was we have a P0 for a troubleshooting API. A design and maybe an implementation. Do we think we can have that done by feature freeze in 3 weeks, or should we scale it back? And Mitch, a lot of this is on you because I know you were spearheading troubleshooting API.
Yeah,
do we want to make it?
I think we can have this to an experimental level at the very least by the release.
Good enough for me. So one of the items that is in our roadmap is having a way to upgrade your existing mesh using the settings that you'd already done. And I have a PR that uses this awkward flag profile from mesh that I think Mander suggested possibly in jest. I was wondering if anyone had thoughts on how this should appear in the command line. So the idea is usually when you do istio install, you give it a profile, maybe a revision if you're upgrading in place. Profile from cluster sort of says don't use one of the compiled in profiles like demo or default, but just use whatever customization you used last time. Any thoughts on what this should look like? Implementation is straightforward. It's just how should we expose it so people know it's there and that because some users want it, other users don't.
Well, I mean, if it's a flag, if some users want it and others don't, that's not a problem, right? It's a flag.
Fair enough.
So what does this do? I just want to make sure I understand. Is this to query the profile on the mesh and then install another one?
Yes. So what happens today is that when to installing Istio, it puts the Istio operator CR that was used by Istio or could be used by the operator onto your cluster to remind you of what you have. And this would use that over what's compiled into Istio. I want to use, and currently it's not being used for much of anything other than verify install, although I should probably mention this great idea I have for listing control planes. One of the items that I'm still designing for is to list the control planes. And my new proposal is for cloud operators. This is not something users would be able to do, but if you installed your cluster yourself, proposing a new Istio manifest list that lists all of those operators that were created when you did Istio install and tells it what profile you originally used, but then also gives the customizations you supplied. So this would be a way for a user to see what options they had chosen in a simpler way than viewing the complete YAML, which can be unwieldy. But the idea is, rather than making the user type in all these things into a script or build an IOP YAML that they use for a pipeline, the idea is Istio install could just read it and use it.
Okay, I see. So it could be pretty convenient. I guess the only confusing I had, if I look at this from a user perspective, is this flag profile from Mesh. It wasn't clear to me. It would just reuse the profile I had in my current cluster, or would it just not only using the profile, but also all the customization I had on top of that profile? I think it's the later, right? But the naming doesn't necessarily indicate to me it's doing the later.
So first, let me ask, were you aware that we save all of your install options into the mesh, into the cluster?
Yes, I learned it a week ago because you told me.
Okay. So does it belong as an option on Istio install? Should it be a manifest command? How can we let the user sort of know that, I mean, it could be settings from Mesh, or previous settings, or it, what, do we have any thoughts on that?
So, Ed, I've been a big supporter of this idea in the past, but I have to say that talking with Casey just now gives me just a touch of hesitation. So the motivation here is that your upgrades are non-destructive, right? Right now, if you just run a very simple Istio upgrade command, assuming you installed with a whole bunch of flags, you not only get an upgrade, you get all those flags unset, which is not probably what the user intended when running Istio upgrade. On the other hand, I feel like the right solution to this problem is to use CICD for deploying Istio the way that we just heard that Mindbody does, because it gives the full holistic experience. I just wonder if this isn't about 30% of what our users need, and if it might not be better to just publish a few blog posts really showcasing CI integrations and encouraging our users to go that way.
So there's a couple other things I could do than this PR. One is I could incorporate your previous settings in the "Are you sure" prompt. So right now it says, you know, you're installing 1.7, are you sure? It could say you're installing 1.7 and you're changing the value of auto MTLS, are you sure? Or it could say you're changing the value of auto MTLS, and do you want to use the old value or the new value? Do we want like an interactive thing like that for those users, or a reporting thing, or none of this?
I would say, first of all, what does Helm do? And my vague memory is that Helm does what you described as, it tells you the diff, but it's not. Actually, I don't remember what it does. But whatever Helm does, we're basically ripping off Helm, and we've taken all their flags and everything. And so if we're going to copy Helm, we should probably use the same behavior as Helm, right? Which, if we're not doing that, and I don't know what their behavior is, so I'm just saying that blindly, I do think the warning sounds like a great idea. Like the diff and the confirmation. That makes a lot of sense to me.
All right, good enough for me.
Yes, my gut feeling is this would be more useful for people doing testing. I think people deploy in production, they probably want to know exactly what they are deploying. They are most likely using a CI/CD pipeline instead of relying on their runtime configuration of the cluster at that moment, because that could be wrong. But it could be helpful for us doing testing, or people doing casual testing in dev. I think it could be easily help for people testing the revision and testing upgrade with the Canary with revision.
Fair enough. I will attempt to rework it as a confirmation message. Because I think you're right. I think this is something developers do and production should not do. I had one other question I wanted to raise to the group. Shamsu and I got into it discussion on GitHub where he made a PR to get rid of the use of our subcommands. And I was wondering if the folks here, when they see the commands of istio like install or analyze, do you think of those as being commands or subcommands? I thought subcommand was the term, that seems to be the term used in Go and in Cobra, but Shamsur was sure that install and these other commands are commands. Do we have any thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I always think they are commands instead of subcommands. Subcommands, it would be more like proxy config secret, like the second thing. But I could be right.
Subcommand is a term in Cobra, which is what we use for generating our CLI. From that perspective, almost everything we do is a subcommand. Like experimental would be one of the few top-level commands that we support. Everything below that is a subcommand. We're really treating them like the top-level commands are more like categories or not exactly namespaces. And I think, Ed, you have a PR out for sort of reconciling istio commands into groups by what role would be executing them or what role they require in terms of privileges.
Yeah.
Yeah, the admin and user.
So,
yeah.
You know, I gave Shamsur a hard time because, you know, I saw web pages that said things like, you know, go build and go get our different subcommands. And so I was thinking he was way off base, but it looks like Lynn agrees with Shamsur. What do we think? For the long term, you're right, Mitch. We want to reorganize everything, but I want to make sure I didn't give too hard of feedback on the PR that's out.
So to me, I think install, manifest, these are our top-level commands. I mean, if you think about subcommands from Cobra perspective, yes, they are subcommands. But if you're a user just using Istio, I mean, these are the top commands because they represent the most important function of Istio.
Fair enough, and I can approve Shamsur's change, which is purely grammar and also removing discussion of commands that we've also removed. So thanks. Mitch, we have 5 minutes. I don't know if we have time for either one of these items. Should we put these off until next week?
Sorry, I'm switching tabs to get back.
Personas and listing control planes.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, next week is probably good. At least for personas, it's going to take a longer conversation than 5 minutes.
All right, I'm going to say two things then. First, I'm going to say that if the meeting doesn't start next week, it's because I have jury duty, and I will put Mitch's Google Hangout in the link here if that happens, so that everyone will know, but I may not be able to change any calendar entries you already have. The other thing is that I've been hard at work on writing a proposal for listing control planes, which is a long-standing item. I think it's P1. And I'm proposing 3 commands. So I'm going to ask people, although this is, I don't have time to review it. If anyone wants to read this ahead and make comments for my next time I present this, here's what I'm proposing. I'm proposing istio manifest list, which would list, normally you're not in a canary, so it would just say the revision you're using and what profile it came from. And it will also say if you've done any customizations on that profile, which I think is just handy for people to see what they have when they sit down. But then I also wanted to remix the number of pods and the age from Kubernetes here. I think this would, and this is operators thing. I think this would be a nice way to list it. The listing of the sidecar control planes is something that we've struggled with. We have istio version, which tells you what version each sidecar is using, but it can be confusing. So here's what I'm proposing. I'm proposing istio proxy list, which can either show by control plane or by namespace. If you show it by control plane, it looks very similar to the previous thing, But of course, you can't see the settings because you might not have access to them. It might be a central Istio. So it tells you where the control plane lives and what data plane namespaces are set up to be injected for that revision. How many pods are in those namespaces, and how many sidecars are stale. And stale sidecars is a new concept, and those are the sidecars that when you run Istio Analyze, it says the proxy image is old. It doesn't reflect what's in your injector. Maybe that's the wrong
stale
term.
Image, not stale config.
Yeah, stale image.
Maybe we don't want to use the word stale there, because at all. Because when you said stale, I immediately thought the same as you did, Mitch.
So that's a good point. So we need a better term for that than stale. I will say that I was thinking that we might consider adding a column for that dynamic staleness, in addition to the old image staleness. So anyway, listing by control plane is nice. This is helpful if you're doing a canary to know what you've got out there and which namespaces are which. Listing it by namespace, also nice. I'm not sure if we need both or if one of these is better and we should get rid of the other one. And this just lists all of your namespaces and which revision is set to inject on it and the information we saw before. And then something I've been hearing a lot about from users in my IBM team is that users want to freshen those sidecars. So this is kind of something of a sketch, but if we sort of have images that are old that we've sort of identified with this command, Istio proxy update sidecar, we appear to proxy list. Update sidecar or update would either take a single resource, like a deployment, an entire namespace, or maybe an entire cluster. It would look for these old images, and if they were deployments and they were auto-injected, it could restart them. And it could say something like, well, I'm restarting HTTP bin. It uses 7.1, and it currently is on, this is what I had on my machine, it's currently using the wrong image. It's using 1.8 dev, and we're going to install the image sidecar 171, and then it's going to, after it does all that, say one pod was restarted, and then maybe 100% of the restarted pods are running. Because the last thing you want to hear is that they all are crash loopback. And maybe there's a wait command that sort of waits so that you can see if the pods reach running or if they get stuck in container pull or something like that. Do we think these commands would be helpful?
The refresh command, I think, is helpful, but not feasible given Kubernetes.
Okay.
I don't think that we have a way to safely, reflecting deployment and rollout strategies, update the sidecar only in the pods where it's currently out of date.
Well, we know the pods that we know the pods that are out of date. There's no way to fix that. We could delete them and let the auto injector take care of it, which is what I was thinking.
Yeah, for a very large deployment, that might be acceptable. But you do have deployments that scale down to one, or other deployments that are running at very near capacity, for which you really want to respect the rollout strategy, which would be create a new item on the new revision before deleting the old item on the old revision, if that makes sense.
So would it be better maybe to output just like informational stuff? So this currently doesn't output the names of the pods, but either an option on this or a separate command that sort of says these deployments are old. If you want to fix them, or should we just tell people to use the analyzer?
I think we recommend restarting the deployments altogether, and we can even do it for them if we want to. Then what we need to invest in or investigate is those handful of scenarios where they're not using deployments, where they're using jobs or stateful sets or something along those lines.
Yes.
And understand what a reasonable way to target a portion of that workload is, and I don't know what that is yet.
Yeah, it's a big trouble for manual injection as well. But I thought I'd put it out there to see if people liked it. All right, so we're over time. I will refresh this based on what I just heard, and also refresh the meeting notes based on what we heard from Casey from Mindbody. And hopefully I will see you next week. Thank you, everyone.